Hi, and welcome to the Digital Job Site. In this tutorial, I'm going to show how I set up and use the Photomatch feature of SketchUp for exterior remodeling projects. I chose this rather simple and ordinary small house for this tutorial, and I'll show the steps that I used to set up the photo in Photomatch and then add a small stoop and a roof over the entryway. It's easier to show the steps on a simple project like this, but the basic concept can be used for projects that are much more complex. To get ready for this tutorial, I went through the steps, created this model, and added a couple layers that I showed earlier, the stoop and the entry roof. I just put those on separate layers. I have the shadows turned on here, and I also have a layer in here called a main roof model, which is basically an overlay of the existing roof surface that I use for a reference for modeling this roof from. But I'll go through the steps from the beginning to show you how and hopefully why I set things up this way. So let's get started. I'll just start a new model and bring in a photo. I'm using SketchUp Make 2016 here, but these keystrokes are similar to most of the versions. We're just going to go match new photo and then drill down to wherever your saved images are. And I've got my images buried way down in the weeds, so it takes a while to dig one up. But bringing in a photograph ends up with this screen. Some viewers may have seen the Photomatch example I did doing a fireplace mantle for an interior scene, and this is similar, only it's the exterior instead. I'm going to choose the outside frame of reference for this particular model, although I really haven't been able to discern noticeable differences between those three styles that show up. Something to remember when working with Photomatch is that scrolling in and out with the mouse wheel works great. I use a 3D mouse, and if I touch that at all, you can see the photograph disappears, but it's brought back by just clicking the photo tab. It's helpful to get as much visible information in a photograph, but sometimes that's kind of difficult. What I'm looking for in a Photomatch photograph is to have lines that relate to the red and green and blue axis from SketchUp, but sometimes that's kind of difficult. This photograph has a lot of right to left or red axis lines, but very little in the way of front to back lines. Got a little bit of soffit here and an edge of a chimney. But I'm using this photo that to me is a bit less than ideal just to show how to work around some of the shortcomings and get a functional model in the process. So the first thing I like to do is to take the blue axis and the origin point, which is this little yellow dot here, and put it somewhere meaningful in the photograph. And for this one, I'm going to set it up right on the very corner of this door. And I'm zooming in with my scroll wheel so I don't lose the photograph. And I know that door is going to be 80 inches tall and 36 inches wide. You can save yourself some trouble by taking some site measurements. On this one, I thought in retrospect I should have measured the protrusion of this soffit, the width of the siding, the distance from the door to the edge of the roof, etc. But I failed to do that the day I took the photograph, and I'm just going to carry on with the tutorial to show you how I work around some of those shortcomings. So once the origin is set, it looks like we're all done because we've got this vertical blue line going vertical on the edge of the door, which is what we want to end up with, but the vanishing points aren't set yet, and we get that by moving these little dotted bars around. And I want the red orientation bars to be set up going right to left and the green ones to be going front to back. So I've grabbed this red one. You can just move them around wherever. I'm just going to pick the bottom edge of this siding and line up this bar with that the best I can. Zooming in as your friend, so any time there's a challenge, just zoom in to get the detail. The more spread you can get between these bars, it seems to help the photo be more accurate as far as perspective. So I've taken the siding there by the bottom, and I'm going to take the bottom of this fascia, which I would assume is somewhat level even on an older house like this. So we've got the red axes all set up nice. I'm going to grab the green ones, and like I said, there's very little to go by in the front-back direction on this house photograph. So these are going to act a little bit weird, but I'm going to grab the edge of this roof overhang, this little soffit, and get one of these green bars to line up on it. And there's all kinds of funny things going on, but I just persist in getting that green line to orient to that horizontal front-back surface. You can see it's tipped our blue axis way out of whack there. but that should straighten out as we proceed. The only other meaningful front and back line that I have is the top of this chimney cap, and I'm glad that showed up in the photograph because it's pretty important at this point. Just moving this bar around, setting it in place, and getting it to line up on something that should be front to back parallel. And I flip that bar front to back like that, so now I've just shifted at one end for the other end. I just realized that because it was throwing that blue axis so far off when I set the green one. And now there's still a fair amount of tilt to the blue axis. And the way I fix that is these red lines, I'm real confident of those following a level surface that goes right to left, but I'm less confident in the green direction because I have such a short reference point. So I'm just going to take one of these and cheat. You can see up on that chimney cap that's barely moving, and it has a huge effect on the vertical axis. So I'm just going to assume that that chimney cap isn't that good of a reference. If I zoom in, you can see it looks like it's 1.5 inches off in the horizontal, but that's straightened out this blue axis so it's running nice and parallel to the door. I hope that thought process makes sense. There's a high likelihood that that chimney is twisted or turned or out of level, and so it's not necessarily that good of a reference. But by tweaking the thing that's most likely a bad reference, I can easily plumb up that line and everything's going to work good. So with that tweaking done, I'm going to go into the Match Photo dialog box and just click Done so that we set this alignment process. This is probably a good time to go into File and Save so that your work doesn't evaporate if your computer makes a fuss. So now that our photograph is oriented to the axis, the next step is to establish a dimension so that SketchUp and the photograph are synchronized for size. There's probably a lot of ways of doing this, but the way I like to do it is to draw a line on a known dimension. So I'm just going to zoom in here till we can see that axis, take the line tool, go down to our point of origin, which is very easy to find, and I'm going to scroll in and go up to the top of this door. And so I'm drawing one line in SketchUp on the photograph. And if I just stay on the blue axis and go right to the top of that door, you can't see anything that I've done there, but if you rotate out and make the photograph disappear, here's the line I just drew, this blue line. It's the only thing in the SketchUp model, and it lays right on the edge of the door. And that reference line could be anything. I could use this lamppost, I could use the length of this soffit, I could use the height of a window, any known reference from the photograph. I want to establish that so SketchUp knows the relationship of the photograph to the model. So with the line selected, if you look in the entity info box, you can see that the line has been drawn 37 7/64, but we want it to be 80 inches, which would be the height of that door. The way that I reconcile the two is by taking the tape measure tool and selecting that line. Now if we look in the value control box down here, we get length 37 7/64. But before I touch any other keys, I'm just going to type in 80, enter. And this little dialog box here is the key to this whole Photomatch process. When you type in a known dimension and say yes. And what that does is if you reselect that blue line, now you look in the entity info box and it's 80 inches long. So now if we make the model disappear, we have a line that exists in a SketchUp model that's 80 inches long. So with that line established, the next thing I'm going to put in the model is a rectangle to represent the size of the door. So I'm clicking the top and the bottom of the line. I'm just going to drag this rectangle over and then type in comma 36, enter. And that'll give us a rectangle that's 80 inches tall and 36 inches wide. So now when we click the photograph, you can see our rectangle slaps itself right on the face of that door. And with that rectangle, which I will make into a group, we now have a tangible link between the model and the photograph. With this groundwork taken care of, it's now time to establish the existing house structure here. And for all practical purposes, this front door is in the same plane as the front of the house, which by zooming in on the photograph, the front of the house interacts with the roof right here. So it's tempting to just take a pencil tool and start tracing around things on the photograph to get these things to coordinate. And while in the photograph view, this little trapezoid looking thing looks like it's right where it needs to be on the photograph, As soon as we pivot out and look at the model, you can see how wrong that is. This is in the same plane as the front of the house instead of being perpendicular to it. So it'd be nice if SketchUp could figure all that out and understand exactly what you're trying to do and why. It really can't. So I'm just going to use the back arrow to get out of that set of moves, and then we're going to go about this a little more directly. So I'm going to take the tape measure tool and go down to the red axis, which I know is in the plane of the front of the house. And if I go up here to the top of the door, we'll just throw a reference line in there. Well, I still have that tool. So I'm just going to stretch over here till I get to the edge of this roof. And I'm looking at the dimension there. It's 150 and some little fraction. And I'm thinking when the carpenter built this, he probably picked an even number. So I'm just going to go 150 and set that line at 150 inches. Actually, let's go 151 and see what happens. I like that a little better. That line looks right in the corner between this little bit of fascia and the front wall of the house. So next thing I want to establish is the projection of this little pork chop. And now that I've got it to snap in the green direction, I'm just going to drop it and then type in 18, enter. And it looks like it's a little bit short on that roof. So I'm going to try 20, enter. And that's pretty good. Next thing I'm going to do is get the difference in height between the top of the door and the bottom of this little pork chop. And that's looking like 4 inches, which seems like a sensible measurement. Rotate a copy of that blue line, and let's just swing it up 90 degrees. And I like that. So what we're getting with all these guidelines is an accurate location of this little fascia pork chop here. The next thing I want to do is establish the pitch of the roof. So with the protractor tool, I'm just going to get on this point where the roof and the fascia meet. Just going to click in right about there, mouse over in the left direction so that we're pivoting this guideline in the red plane on the green axis, and then we're going to start a horizontal and go down 4:12, enter. That looks a little flat, so I'm going to try 4.5:12, enter. And that looks like it's following this roof. So we're going to assume for now that this roof was framed in at 4.5:12 for a slope. Now that we've got this little pork chop established with guidelines, we can just trace around it from intersection to intersection and establish a face. The face is transparent and hard to see, so let's go into the styles and the edit tab and then click foreground photo, and that makes our model opaque. And if we look now backing out, you can see that this plane is perpendicular to the front of the house and the door, which is what we want in the first place. This is shaping up nicely, and I think you'll find that the time you spend up front getting the model and the photograph set up and organized really makes things go more smoothly and efficiently later on. For now, I'm going to take this little pork chop and make it a group, and then let's draw a 3-point square to represent this roof plane. And let's just go down here about where the end of the roof is. And then I can take this line and stretch it up a ways along that guideline and see where that ends us up on the roof. And that wasn't too bad. Let's make this roof a little bit taller by moving this top up a couple more inches and then going back to look at the photograph. And now that we've got this roof plane established, it's looking like the pitch of the roof is a little bit off. So I'm going to see what happens if we take that roof plane and just tilt it down 0.5:12 and take a 1/2 inch of pitch out of the roof. And I think that's a better match. So I'm going to go into this and slide this roof edge over a little bit. I think we'll call that good because this long edge of the roof is a more accurate gauge for the slope than this little pork chop thing. So let's go back into this group here and move this little point down so that the pork chop and the roof both match. The only thing now wrong is our guideline, which we'll just delete. Reverse that face and go back to the photograph. And I'm going to uncheck that foreground photo there. And now that I've changed the pitch of the roof, it looks like the height of this plane is a little off, so I'm clicking on the upper line, inferring to this side, and then looking for the magenta line to indicate that I'm going up in that plane of the roof, so that with another guideline we can drag this roof plane up to the top of the ridge and everything's sliding in just like it needs to. Uncheck the foreground photo and you can see how the model is now oriented to the photograph. This can be a bit of a tedious process to get these things set up, but it's worth it in the long run, and the more you do it, the quicker and easier it gets. This takes me a lot longer because I'm dictating the tutorial, but this is actually a pretty quick process. Do a little more homework here and set up a couple layers. I'm going to put in the roof plane as one layer, make this a group, and make this and this as part of that roof plane group so that we can shut those on and off when they're not necessary. I think next I'll put a little piece of fascia in here, which we can do by getting out of the photograph mode, taking our pork chop with the push-pull tool and just whipping it down here to the end of the roof. And then let's delete this back line and then take these two groups and explode them, make them a new group, go into that group and delete this line. And by looking at the model, you can see how now I have fascia that lines up with the existing, and then I've gone to transparent mode again. You can see how that just lays right on top of the actual structure. We should be done with these guides, so I'm just going to dump all those at once and put another one in here in model mode. I'm going to go from the edge of the door to the center. I'm going to go into this group and delete that face because we don't need that. And now what we have is the center line of the door projecting up through the roof plane. And it's a roundabout process to get to this point, but if we would have started out with the rectangle to represent the door and then just ran this guideline in there through the roof of the photograph, we wouldn't have an actual reference where the center of the little porch roof will end up being. And I hope by watching this process you'll get an idea of how to extrapolate information out of the photograph into a reference model so that you can build from there. So now that we've got this framework established, we can go about modeling this little entry roof. So let's get a guideline out here in the front. So I'll get it going green and index it on the front of the fascia. Let's just make that entry roof 8 feet wide. So we'll go 48 this way and 96 this way and draw a rectangle on those guidelines. And let's just pull it out 4 feet. Make it a group while we're at it. By moving and copying, by hitting Control, we'll be able to raise the roof up, and we want to go up a 412 pitch. And we can now raise that center line up to get our little gable, and we'll pull the roof back to get it to lay on this other roof. And I just drew a horizontal line there. I'm just going to stretch this roof back an arbitrary amount. Draw a couple lines here to establish the valleys. Let's pull this group out, say 100 inches. Make that cut by erasing that out, and then go back in our 100 inches. We can go in this group and trace out the bottom of the roof and make those two cuts. And by going into the layers, you can see how these various things tie together. So we'll shut that off, turn this on, and go back to the model. And you can see how this little porch roof ties into the photograph with the correct perspective and orientation. To emphasize the lesson that doing the preliminary work to orient the photograph and the model is the key to the Photomatch process, we'll add a concrete stoop and a couple posts on this porch roof. And by looking at the photograph, you can see how the porch or the sidewalk level is a few inches lower than the door threshold. So if we zoom in and take a measurement down vertically here, it looks like pretty much 4 inches. So we'll just model a stoop in there at 4 inches. We can just go into model view and do that work by making a 8-foot square pad at 96 by 96. I'm going to pull it down 4 inches and then make this whole thing a group, and then we can orient it to the door just by moving it around. So we'll just line up the center of the stoop with the center of the door and then move it down 4 inches. And then if we go into the roof, make everything in here a group, and then in this group we'll put a couple 6 by 6 posts. So I'll go 5.5 comma 5.5, enter. Take this, make it a component 6 by 6 post. Let's just shuffle that around a little bit. It's going to move it back 4 inches and in 4 inches. Move it and copy it to the other side. If we go to the edge, it's 86.5, so we'll go 82.5 to bring it into 4 inches like the other side. And then just go into one of these components and stretch it down to that pad. And now when we go back to the model, you can see how we've added the porch and the stoop to go along with it. If we don't like this size, this is a little big, we can just shove this back 18 inches to make it line up a little better, and there you have it. The process from here to refine the model to the image that I showed at the beginning of the tutorial is basic SketchUp work with modeling different features, an overhang, some trim, the shingles, etc. That can all be done with various materials, so I won't go through the particulars there, but let's take a look at how various design options can be presented with this scheme. And because it's just basic SketchUp modeling, I'm just going to fast forward the video showing the process of creating two alternative roof designs, adding them to layers here so that those can be presented in the same model with the same photograph. So after that bit of modeling and layering, we can show how these different roof concepts work by adding the first porch roof that we modeled, and then the wide roof concept is just like an accent roof here. And when I enter the wide roof concept there, you can see one of the issues that can show up with Photomatch, where the corner of this roof looks like it's actually covering up part of this porch light. So it would be good to anticipate that sort of issue when taking the photograph and shooting it from slightly different angle. Otherwise, this sort of thing can be worked through by putting it into a Photomatch type program and creating layers to get the foreground to show in front of the background. But that's a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. We click off the wide roof and we put the eyebrow porch roof concept in there, and you can just see how different design elements can be added and subtracted, and the design elements orient with the photograph because of the process we used in the beginning for setting up the Photomatch. The last thing I want to show in this tutorial is how to extrapolate the effort that's gone into the modeling process by importing another photograph of the same house and then bringing these various models into that new photograph. I will try to go through this process fairly quickly to show that once you're familiar with the process, it's actually pretty quick and streamlined. You can get a lot done without undue effort. So what I'll do is grab everything in the model and copy it, and then start a new file and immediately go to Match New Photo and drill down to import another view of the same property from a different angle. And I think this one will do. So I'll just dig right in and get this lined up, take our point of origin, plunk it down on the corner of this door, right where we had the other one, set our red bars to horizontal. I'll just put this one on the ridge this time, and the angle of this photo is even worse than the last one as far as front and back things to go by. And we'll just hope this lamppost isn't crooked and go back up to the chimney. And it looks like I need to do a similar bit of fudging with that chimney line to get the blue line looking plumb. That's not bad. And with those things lined up, we're going to say done. For the Photomatch, go in and draw our scale line, corner of the door. I get spoiled with that 3D mouse when I can't use it. I struggle getting around. There's our line. Let's measure it to scale the photograph. 80, enter. Here's our magic box to click yes. So now we have a photograph with this line in there, and then we should be just able to go edit and paste in place. With all those parts pasted in place, I'm going to shut off the roof planes and the wide concept roof and have the eyebrow roof turned off, and then we'll go back into the photograph and you get a good idea of how the same model lines up to a different photograph. Let's go into styles and make the foreground photo opaque. You can see how there's a little discrepancy here with the way the fascia lines up, but that's not too bad for our representation. If we shut off this concept and go to the wide roof concept, similar thing, get an idea how that shape of roof would look. And last but not least, the eyebrow roof concept floats into place. In this instance, when I put the roof plane back in and make this foreground photo transparent, you can see how this edge and the ridge line don't line up very well with that roof, and that must have something to do with parallax in the photograph or some assumptions that I made in the initial setup. A few adjustments would straighten that out in this view, but even with that discrepancy in the roof plane part of it, the concept of this porch roof could be easily displayed using this process. I thought it was interesting. By turning the shadows on, I'm going to take the shadows off the ground and then play with the shadow settings here. And you can see how it's possible to match the angle of the shadows to the actual angles in the photograph just with playing with those shadow settings. I kind of get a kick out of that. So I hope that with this tutorial, viewers are able to come up with ways to use Photomatch to plan, visualize, and design various projects. Since compared to other methods, I've found this an invaluable tool for design and planning work. Thanks for checking out this tutorial on the digital job site. I hope that you'll hit the like button, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.